Hello, everyone. My name is Doug Coons. I'm here to talk to you about the new Windows 365 reporting and monitoring solution. This is a new feature that is just in private preview, moving to public preview in the next month or so. And I'm really excited to walk you through the feature and talk to you about the reasons that we have made these modifications. This is some of the great advancements we've made. So to start off with, we're going to go ahead and do a quick agenda. We're going to be first starting with the reporting evolution and why are we even changing reporting and monitoring in Windows 365. And then for the bulk of the session, we're going to do demos, which is always the fun part. We'll be doing live demonstrations, walking through the new experience, the various components in the experience, and do some what-if scenarios in terms of how to use the new reporting and monitoring. So first, let's talk about the evolution of Windows 365 reporting and why we're even doing all of this work. So we started about a year ago and learned from our customers. Some of the biggest feedback that we were getting in Windows 365 was, especially from customers that are traditional virtual desktop users, was our reporting and monitoring didn't allow them the type of visibility and experience that they were used to in order to do troubleshooting, understand configuration, and so forth. And so we started off really doing a deep dive, not with just the customers that were complaining, but with a large number of folks. I personally talked with 25 of our most, I'll say customers that used the product the most, not necessarily all of them the biggest, but those that were really using the product. We also issued a survey, a very comprehensive survey that over 100 folks took the time to respond to. And these folks were spending a half hour to an hour filling out this survey. So we appreciated their time and we learned just a plethora of things from those people and applied that to the solution that we came up with. What we started with was we learned that, first of all, our reports in comparison to traditional VDI, I mentioned this before, if we think about things like Citrix on-prem and so forth, that our reporting was not up to par in a few ways. First of all, most of our data was tabular data. It wasn't very human consumable. And in terms of things like trends and understanding baselines and those types of things, it was very hard to use. Also, and this is what this slide primarily shows, is contextually, our reporting was not very effective. If I wanted to do something like troubleshoot a user's connection, that connection has a lot of context behind it. It has the user endpoint, which is the thing that the user is touching. It has the service layer, meaning all of the things in Windows 365 that are configured. You know, what provisioning policy am I using? What image did I use to do the initial imaging of the cloud PC and so forth? And then I have my host. What is the remote desktop stack on the host? What is being used for multimedia and Teams redirection and optimization and so forth? And all of those pieces were in separate locations. So if I happen to have a problem, and this is what's represented on the screen, I would have to look in dozens of places. And if I'm trying to troubleshoot a connection, as an example, I would have to move between all of those screens. And it would be very time consuming and also would require a lot of expertise on the part of the administrator in order to be able to do that type of troubleshooting and be able to do that type of analysis. And so what we've moved to is a completely different type of environment. This new reporting and monitoring experience specifically allows the user to understand contextually what is going on. It provides rich visualizations that allows an administrator to consume large amount of information contextually, both trended over time and based on what is going on in the environment. It allows rich slicing and filtering of data to do things like troubleshooting and so forth. And so really excited about the direction we're moving. We started out with phase one, which has a couple of kind of focus areas. One is core functionality, core visuals, core data slicing, core filters, and our most prominent use cases. And I'll cover those when we get into the next couple of slides. And then we have phase two, which will add additional visualizations, additional information. It'll add more data, more filters, and also more flexibility. So the first use cases, the core use cases we focused on were what we call operation monitoring. This is a systemic analysis of our entire environment. So, hey, what's going on across everything in my tenant? And, do I see any problems in terms of connection reliability, user experience, and so forth? That's mainly for operations folks who are looking at, like in a network operations center, is there anything that is happening I need to be aware of that could cause a large systemic problem? The second area we focused on is another set of users. And by the way, we looked at these in the way that our customers and our administrators cognitively think about our environment. And so we put these use cases together and the user experiences I'll show you in a moment together in order to allow different users and different use cases to have very unique environments, if you will, in order to do their work. So the next place, we have the systemic area. Then we have an area that is for help desk and kind of deep dives on specific users and devices. In the use case here is I have a customer, myself as an internal help desk. I have a customer or a user that calls in and they say, hey, I'm having a problem, or I had a problem yesterday and I want to understand what's going on. Or maybe I have problems intermittently over time and I want to be able to deep dive on that. And then finally, the last core use case or initial use case in phase one that we looked at was overall end-to-end configuration. And this allows me to look contextually over time at what is being used in my environment. And it allows me to, not in terms of troubleshooting. So this doesn't have to do with, either my organization, my environment, or a user saying I have a problem. It just lets me look and cross the environment and say, hey, this is how things are configured. It also allows me to look back over time and see how they were configured at some point in the past, as well as how they're trending. So with that said, let's jump in and get into the fun part, which is the demonstration. As I mentioned before, we broke the feature down into very specific usable areas. Connection health is that tenant level view that allows us to look across our entire environment and see what's going on. User and device is the page that allows us to focus on kind of the help desk scenario. I have a user who's called in, or I have some sort of report there's a problem with the device, and I want to be able to do a deep dive on that. And then configurations, which will be renamed to configuration monitoring, just for clarity. And this allows me to look at the configuration across my environment and what that looks like. So we'll do most of our work in this page because all of the pages work basically the same, and this has the most context. From here, when we look at the next type of level of information, once I've chosen my use case, I'll want to establish what context I'm looking at. And what I mean by that is, am I looking at my entire environment? Am I looking at a specific area and so forth? So I'm going to go ahead and reset this back to my full environment. So I'm looking across this entire environment. By the way, we are using a large scale production environment for this demonstration. So when you think about scale and kind of performance, this is what you would expect as you see our demonstration for a real customer experience. We're looking at an environment that often has, 16,000 active connections, which for Windows 365 is a substantial environment. Inside of the tenant, we look at various metrics. The metrics we have currently are how many connections are there and how many connections have there been over time? What is my failure rate? What is the health of my cloud PCs? In other words, this is a synthetic load that we continually run to determine, are the cloud PC hosts currently operating effectively and correctly? And then finally, what is the round trip time for our transport? And this is probably the best single metric in terms of whether or not the user has a good user experience when using the product. We'll be adding more metrics over time. In the near term, we'll be using a metric called mean time to failure, which means if a user connects and remains connected without disconnecting, how long until they would experience a failure? That failure could be caused by anything. It could be their network, their ISP, something inside of Microsoft, which is unusual, but anything that would impact their network would impact that connection. And we've been working hard to improve our protocol to increase that mean time to failure. We'll also be adding sign-in time, which will tell an administrator what the average time for a user to sign in is. And obviously be able to drill down in. We'll show exactly how to do that in a moment. Those are the current metrics and kind of the near-term upcoming metrics that are available. And then inside of the metrics, and this is really where the magic happens, because we know what the things are that we need to understand to know whether the environment is working and our users are having a great experience. But then we need to be able to track down exactly why the users are experiencing what they're experiencing. So we do that by establishing filters and other contexts. So I'll start out by talking about the time range. Every time you look at this, you're going to have a time range. It defaults to 7 days. If I want to look at a very specific event, maybe I had a failure and that happened over a few minutes, and I want to understand what happened, I can change my time range down to 2 hours. That 2 hours then allows the granularity of these charts to be every 2 minutes. So as you can see down here, 1024, 1036, and inside of each one of those, I have a number of data points showing every 2 minutes of time. So I can literally see, hey, at 1052, everything was fine. And by 1056, I had a lot of people who had dropped off or something like that, which is super helpful in terms of those granular problems. On the complete other end of the scale, maybe I want to see over time what's happening. I made some changes and I want to know, is that improving my user experience? Is it improving the reliability of my connections and so forth? And so in these cases, I would choose a longer time range, so all the way out to 28 days. And this is interesting as an example. Here we can see that we have a slight increase of usage week over week for the last 28 days. It's those types of trends that we would be able to see with the longer timelines, but our granularity goes down. Each one of these data points becomes a full day, and we're aggregated within that day in order to understand, the granularity of our data. For this particular demonstration, let's go ahead and move it back to the default, which is 7 days. And then we're going to talk through maybe kind of a real world example of what would I be doing as an administrator looking at my overall tenant. So I come into this environment, I see, overall, hey, my trends don't look bad. Everything looks like things are fairly consistent. I have a couple of interesting blips here, but I know that this is, showing a work week. And so these are a Friday and or a Saturday and Sunday. So maybe these represent users working from home, or maybe other geographies where people's Sundays and Saturdays aren't the same as in the United States. And so, a little bit of difference, but because that's a nice consistent trend, not so worried about that. So the next thing I would do is possibly say, hey, let's drill down on this and see if I can find anything interesting. And for this case, I'm going to say I'm going to do that by slicing the data by region. As you can see, I can slice the data in many different ways. I can look at the client OS, the client type, the environment, SKUs, etc. And so a lot of different ways to slice and filter the data. Again, just because we're going to look at a use case here and try to see if we can learn anything, I'm going to go ahead and choose region. And this will change all of my visuals, everything on the page, including this view data window, which allows us to look at details about the connection. We'll go more deeply into this in a moment. All of this is impacted by these filters that I set up top, including the time range. So I just set my data series to region, which breaks down all of the visuals by region. And so I'm looking through here. I see, here's some interesting things as far as connection failures. I might want to come back and look at these. Looks like there was some cloud PCs that for some period of time were offline or had some host health problems. And so I might want to come look at those later as well. And then looking at my round trip time, and I'm going to choose this one for the demonstration just because it's super noisy, but I do see this outlier right here, this green line. And it gets hidden by the pop-up. We can see that green line that pops up and has a user experience of over 300 milliseconds. And so I want to be able to filter down and understand exactly what's going on there. And that's why I'm going to use this as an example, is because it's on top of, a really noisy kind of environment. So I can come down, hover over these and see each of the lines and notice that this is actually happening in Korea Central. And so, one other thing I should have mentioned earlier, if I look at this data, I come into this tabular data, which gives me a very granular view of everything that happens on a connection. I've already removed some columns here. I've removed device ID, user ID, username and device name, just because we don't want to expose those in the recording, but those normally would be available. And so you would be able to look and search by a username or a device name as an example. And then I can see everything about each connection. So an activity ID represents a connection event for a user. So in this case, this particular connection started on February 13th and is ongoing. I can go all the way over. I can see, what is the agent being used? What's the gateway where the connection went through? What is the Cloud PC type? What is the image? What is the connection protocol, and so forth? All the way through, where is the user's endpoint connected from? Meaning, where, what city, state, and country is the user actually located in, and use that in order to do my diagnostics. So I'm going to go, but the thing I wanted to point out is we have 10,000 items because we're looking at our entire environment. And as a human readable resource, 10,000 table rows isn't really useful. And so I know what I want to look at is Korea Central. So I'm going to come up, I'm going to add a filter so that I can look at only the Korea Central region. I apply that, and this does a couple of things. One, it removes all of the noise from the charts and graphs. So I'm only seeing the specific line that I'm interested in. So I'm looking at, hey, here's this data point for Korea Central. It also makes it so that I'm not looking at 10,000 rows here. I'm only looking at 75 rows, which makes it much more useful in terms of finding the specific event I'm interested in, the specific time, and the specific user. And I'm able to kind of isolate that down. So very important to use the filters and data series to slice and filter the data in order to focus on what we're looking for. So now I am down to a very reasonable number of events for me to look at, meaning the 75 connections. Once I identify a connection, then I can go ahead and go into the events. I actually am going to use a tab to change over to the event view because I've already filtered, as I mentioned, I've already removed the columns here. But each one of these connection events, I mentioned this before, has a specific activity ID. An activity ID, you can see all of these activity IDs are identical because they're all looking at a specific event. This specific event went through without a hitch and actually ended successfully, no errors. But I can look through and see, hey, this user authenticated, they got a license, they established a specific protocol, and so forth, all the way until they sign out. I may also have a scenario where I have an error, in which case I can look and I can see, hey, here's the connection event. I looked in my connection, I had narrowed it down using my filters and sorts, and then I can come over and see exactly what was the connection error and the information about that error. In the case of a checkpoint, I also have a payload that is information called parameters. And so if I have, like a handshake, I can see more information about what exactly happened during that handshake if the event is a checkpoint rather than an error. We don't have time to go deeply into this in this demonstration, but just so you're aware, you can look everywhere from super high level, what's going on in my entire environment. I can filter it down to specific cohorts, such as what is my region, what is my OS type, what is my Cloud PC type, etc. I can then look down to a specific connection, which says, what exactly was the username, the device name, what client was used, where was the connection established from, where it was connected to, and what was the Microsoft path that was used. And that allows me to go very deep to understand the exact problem. So now let's jump through in the last couple of minutes we have for this demonstration and talk about the other two use cases. As I mentioned, the navigation for these is exactly the same. And so I'm going to go ahead and just jump to another tab that I've already set up for these use cases. This one is for user and device. And here I would just select a specific user or device based on the user that's calling in. And I'm able to see, hey, here's a user. And this particular user is using a shared Cloud PC. So I have multiple devices that they're connecting to. I can then look down and see what exactly is going on. I can see, hey, over the last 24 hours, no connection. So I'm going to bump this up to 7 days. And I notice that there's activity here. I can then say, hey, I only want to look at specific cloud PCs that were connected and so forth. And I'm able to do exactly the same filtering, sorting, etc. that I did before, except for because this is a single user or a single device, I'm able to see much more granularity. These are exactly, exact connection events. This connection started at a certain time, ended at a certain time. I can see if it had an error, what the round trip time for that specific connection was, and so forth. So very granular information in that help desk scenario. And then finally, we have our configuration use case where I'm looking over time at what the configuration was. A great example of this is I told all of my users to change the client they're using. And, did that happen? So I can see over time here as an example, hey, this blue, the blue line, which represents a specific client, over time continued to decrease. And the pink client increased. And so, yeah, in this case, let's say that was my use case. Evaluating over time, if my users change the client like I asked them to, I can see that happening. I can also look at anything across the environment. I can look at things like what was the client OS, the things I talked about earlier. What was the provisioning policy? What was the image that was used? What is the Microsoft redirection for multimedia, the Teams optimization, and so forth. So I can see very contextually over time what has gone on and what does my environment look like. So thanks again, everyone, for your time. Really appreciate you taking time out of your day to watch the session. I hope that you found the demonstration and walkthrough useful. I look forward in the future to having you reach out if you have any questions or comments, or especially any feedback from your customers. We're continually improving this space and continue to invest in this, especially over the next couple of years. So any input would be fantastic. Thank you.